Today we will be talking about, we're going to start a new topic, which is the telephone systems. Right. Yeah, bring it up this way here. All right, so the first part of this week, the first lecture, everybody's get two lectures, two 1 hour long lectures, and first half of this week we'll talk about the idea of telephone systems. And we'll talk about something that I call conventional telephone systems. It's a relative term because they're, well, conventional. It's the telephone systems that have been used for the last 20 years or so. Right? Maybe the VoIP telephone systems, which is voice over IP, when they're going to be more popular in 20 years from now, maybe those are going to be called conventional. I don't know. But let's say the telephone systems that have been used for the last 20 years, I call them conventional telephone systems because I have to differentiate that as opposed to the VoIP systems. Well, we will cover both. Yeah? And again, if somebody wants to experiment with any of that, well, we don't have a VoIP telephone system, but we do have Northstar 616 actually connected and working in our lab. Right, so you can just come over and play with that. I can show you some basic programming and all that stuff that has to do with that. All right, so what do we have here on this first slide? We do have this right here. This is the one that we actually have in our lab, connecting and working. It's called Northstar 616 because it is capable of receiving 6 POTS lines from one end. And on the other side of this box, we can connect 16 telephone extensions or 16 telephone stations. It is for small business use purposes. Right? Then the one after that here, it's a smaller one. It's 3 by 8. And of course, by the same analogy, we can connect 3 telephone lines or 3 POTS lines, and we can branch out into 8 telephone extensions. So this is also for small business scenarios. Right? Now over here we have a modular system that you can, you have the main brains of the phone system, and you can keep adding the modules if you need more stations, more otherwise equipment and whatnot, and you can just keep expanding this thing. So this is for not so small type of a business scenario. You can have 200 telephones extensions coming out of this one, and you can have a lot more lines. So now this is the same thing here as that, but this one is open, this one is closed. All right, and there are certain telephone sets associated with that. Right beside that, we have the connection cable distribution system that is associated with that, because we can't just use morettes and whatnot to connect those wires, because if you're talking about 200 phones or 100 phones or even 16 phones, it would just not look very professional if you would just connect the wires as it goes. So there are different type of termination platforms. We will be studying closer the BICS termination platform, and the lab after, so right now we're doing the RG45 plug and the B connector, and the next lab after that, which is going to be after this lab session, we are going to terminate a 25 pair cable onto one of those termination strips. We're gonna have fun, and that lab is just going to be one because it's a bit longer. Right, so this is these are different telephone sets that are associated with this telephone system, and here is a display console that sometimes would be installed in the reception. Now these telephone systems are sort of discontinued. Why am I saying sort of discontinued? It's because they were done by Nortel or Northstar, Norton Telecom, and I'm not sure if the business is completely, the corporation is completely down and out of business or not, but certainly significantly out of business. So supposedly those phone systems were discontinued, but for some reason, somehow, just because those telephone systems were so good and so very popular, you can still buy brand new systems like that. How is it possible? I don't know, but you can still buy it. And they're still quite powerful telephone systems. Now, they can be converted into a hybrid systems. I can tell you later how. So instead of having POTS lines, so the whole system can run on VoIP, but I'm not going to get too far ahead. So instead of connecting POTS lines into this, you can connect something that's called the SIP lines that have to do with VoIP. But let's not get too far ahead here. Let's just take first things first, one thing at a time, right? Now I'm going to spend a few minutes on this slide here, and this is the telephone systems related terminology. Let me just zoom a little bit on something, on one of those here. All right, so CO, remember this stands for central office, right? And that is basically something that's called telephone exchange. Usually it would be a building in which there would be the switching circuitry. The switching circuitry would be installed. The central office in the good old days. In the old days, it used to be a huge office building where the human operators would be receiving your phone calls and patching you through whatever the destination of your choice. Then that used to be called a central office because we would centralize all the telephone lines coming in. So CO. CO, and sometimes the telephone line would be called a CO line. Now the switching systems, they are basically standalone buildings, much smaller than the big offices because we don't need human operators, just electronic circuitry, and everything pretty much runs on its own, requiring occasional service. So CO and CO line would be a telephone line or a POTS line consisting of one pair. And that one pair would be associated with a certain telephone number. Right? Then SL, single line, same idea as CO. SL, single line, is a CO line. Okay, those terms are being used interchangeably. Right? So sometimes you will hear CO line or SL, single line. What's the difference between them? You know what? There's no difference. It's the same thing. It's a pair of wires or a communications pair serving as a telephone connection. Right? Rollover. What does that mean? What's rollover? Because sometimes some of the telephone lines are grouped into something that's called a rollover group. Right? How does this work? Let me just get a marker that writes here. This one writes. All right. So I'm just going to switch to the bigger screen. All right, let's say there is a company that has, let's say, 4 lines. Line 1, line 2, line 3, and line 4. And each of those lines is assigned a number, a telephone number. And the company has ordered 4 POTS lines because the telephone traffic of that is involved with that company requires 4 lines for the communications to be comfortable with all the office workers trying to contact the outside world. So let's say for this business, for this company, 4 telephone lines is enough. And sometimes, bigger ones require 100 lines or 200 lines. Okay? So now, here's the thing. The idea is that if clients try to call in, it's not a good idea to have them hear the busy tone so they can't reach because if somebody is talking on the phone. So these 4 lines, for example, they can be bundled up into something that's called rollover sequence. Right? How does that work? They are grouped into a rollover sequence. One of those telephone numbers can be published. Which number would you publish? Well, the client or the company that purchases those lines would choose which number to publish. It doesn't matter which one do you publish in the phone book or in the directories or whatnot. Excuse me. And usually would be the easiest number to remember or whatnot in that way. Right? So let's say the company has published the first number, and all the other lines, they also have individual numbers assigned, but they are not published. What does it mean? If none of the lines are busy, the whole system is quiet. Right? Somebody from outside tries to call this company, let's say it's a shoe store. Do you have shoes? Well, they wonder if they have shoes. So they call that published number. If none of the lines are being used, that line is going to ring. And whatever the receptionist is, whoever the receptionist is, would pick up and have a conversation with them. However, if there is somebody else in the office that is already talking on that line, that the client from outside still calls that number, but the system, the rollover circuitry, senses that this line is busy, so it's going to direct that call into the next line, even though this number was called. And if that one is busy, it's going to jump onto the next line. And if this one is busy, it's going to jump to the next one. And if this one is busy, then maybe hopefully one of those becomes free, and it's just going to jump over and start basically hunting for the free lines. Of course, if all the lines are busy, then the other client is going to get a busy signal. So that's the idea of rollover sequence. Some of the service calls that you might encounter is that, for example, there would be another line 5 that is also purchased by that company, but requested that it's not part of the rollover sequence, and that could be some sort of maybe it was a popular thing to do, is having a separate line as a fax line, right? And that will be a different number, and of course it will be also published as a fax line. For that purpose, sometimes when somebody connects those lines, because those lines are going to be terminated on a termination strip, right? Those lines are going to be terminated, and they are going to be cross-connected to another termination strip that is connected to the telephone system. And sometimes by mistake somebody connects something else, so the telephone system would have connected lines 1, 2, 3, and 5, and then line number 4 will be connected to the fax machine. And I used to have some service calls like that when I was working in the field, and it was just a matter of like a little tiny detective work, because sometimes when the service calls, you're being sent for service calls, quite often there is a vague description of what the problem is. There's the general description, but you still have to talk to the client to actually find out as much as possible, so your troubleshooting trip is not as difficult as no more difficult than it has to be. So after a short conversation, they will be saying, okay, clients are complaining that when they call our number, they're getting fax machine, because instead of that line can be connected to the fax, maybe this one will be connected to the fax machine. And then I would have to trace all those POTS lines, find out what their individual numbers are, and then I'll just have to rearrange those wires so the termination is done correctly. Now, I'm going to mention one more thing. Whenever somebody is picking up, because that's the communication going inwards towards the business, but if somebody is selecting the line on their phone, because the telephones would have the indications of the line, so you can select the line of your choice on the telephone set, or there will be another option of programming the telephone set, so you just pick it up and dial 9, and by dialing 9, you would basically grab the first available line. Okay, that can go outside. So if you select any of those lines from within the business, call outside, the telephone number on the display of whoever receives that call is not going to be the telephone number of whatever line, is going to be the one that is published. Right? So that's why we're going to talk about something that is the next, after the next. Okay, you know what? I'm just going to mention here. Here is something that's called an ANIC number, Automatic Number Announcement Circuit. Right? Now, in our area here in Ontario, with Bell Canada, it only works with Bell Canada. But other companies, they would have other ANIC numbers, and this is you dial the area code you're in, you pick up the phone, you connect yourself to one of those lines by using a connecting clip and something that's called a diagnostic set, or sometimes called a BAT set. And you pick up that line and you dial that number from that particular line, and that is going to, the circuitry is going to pick up the call and tell you the number you're calling from. It's going to tell you the number of those particular lines. Because if you pick up any of those lines and dial your cell phone number just to see what number you're calling from, it's not going to give you the number that you're tapped into. It's going to give you the published number, right? So that's why. So in the POTS lines, if it's a Bell Canada service, you can just pick up, dial the area code, in our case would be 519, and you go 958-2580 and wait. Circuitry is going to pick up, and there's going to be a voice announcement, you're calling from so number, right? So that's as far as troubleshooting telephone lines. All right, so we jumped one. So here, let's go back here. PBX, Private Branch Exchange. Private Branch Exchange, in the most simple term, it is a box. It's a telephone system in a box. You install that box at whatever the client's communications room or somewhere out of the way. And to one side of the box, you connect the incoming POTS lines, and to the other side of the box, you're connecting the telephone extensions and maybe some other equipment, such as paging system. Remember when we connected the distributed audio speakers system? That would be the amplifier that is powering those speakers, would be connecting to maybe some of the terminals that are associated with something that's called a PA system on that phone. Right? And they're called different ways. Sometimes it's just called PA, right? Or audio out or something like that. It depends on the manufacturer of the telephone system and the way it was labeled. Things were labeled, all right? So private branch exchange. Now, again, then we're going to jump into something that's called KSU, Key System Unit or Key Service Unit. It's the same as PBX, right? Except usually if the telephone systems would be smaller, like 616 up to 16 extensions, or 3x8, or something, even a 24 extension. So you would call that key system unit. And if there would be some bigger, so it would be a telephone system that is powering up the whole, let's say, a hospital or something like that. So that would be a lot of extensions. Usually it would be a private branch exchange. So it would be, but they're the same thing, except one seems to be bigger, one seems to be smaller. But if you use these terms interchangeably, you know what, nobody's going to get hurt. Yeah. So okay, now POTS. We have talked about that. POTS stands for plain old telephone service, and these would be the telephone lines, in their most basic form. That is the regular telephone line, consisting of one pair each, and each of that line has a number assigned by the company that you're purchasing that from. So over here in Ontario, we're in Ontario, so it would be usually Bell Canada, but there are some others as well. In the States, quite often you can get it ADT. In some of the western parts of Canada, TELUS is a major player as well. So there are different companies, right? ATA. ATA is a analog telephone adapter. We're going to come back to that idea and expand on that a little bit more, but basically what it is that if you just buy a regular telephone set, and let's call it a SL, single line set. Single line set is the most basic telephone set that you would buy in the local hardware store, and you plug into the wall where the POTS line is connected to from the city, from the CO line, from the CO. Now, when it comes to using the PBXs or KSUs, which would be the telephone systems, or the conventional telephone systems, as I call them, that telephone will not work when you plug it into that box. It has the signal is arranged in a certain way, and it's provided a certain way, so that that telephone that is manufactured by the company that has produced that telephone system or that box. So they basically speak the same language. If you plug that telephone into the wall outlet where POTS line is provided, that telephone is not going to work. So those are called something that's called proprietary telephone sets. The telephone sets are proprietary to that telephone system that we're using, and usually they're being sold in the package. And if you need more, there's a phone ring, right? If you need more of those, you just basically have to call the same company who has sold or installed that thing for you, right? So sometimes you need to connect other equipment to that telephone system, such as, well, one of them would be something that's called a paging interface. What is a paging interface? A paging interface is a box that translates the signal from whatever the signal is, the form of the signal. Somebody's got their microphone not muted. Please mute it. If you want to translate this type of a signal that is produced by the telephone system, and if there's another equipment that doesn't understand the signal of that particular telephone system, such as paging interface, and paging interfaces are usually configured in form of POTS, so they understand the POTS type of signal. So if you connect that into that box, into the system, those things are not going to talk. So you have to have something in between that translates that signal in one to another. So that's why we use something that's called the ATA adapters, right? So analog telephone adapter, ATA, it's a box that translates one signal to another. And usually from whatever, and those ATA adapters would be produced by the manufacturers that manufacture that particular telephone system. Would it be Toshiba? Would it be Panasonic? Would it be Northstar? Would be some other, whatever it is, okay? So they would have their own ATA adapters, and on one side, on one side of that ATA, there would be a connector that would work with the telephone system at hand, and on the other side there will be another connector that basically works as POTS. Okay? And sometimes you want to connect and if you have that telephone that you bought at the hardware store, you can connect to that phone system through that ATA box, right? Through the ATA, and most of the features would be usable or available for you. Except in the proprietary telephone system, you have buttons with the features. Let's say all call page, or telephone transfer, or call transfer, or things like that. You just wouldn't have that on a regular single line set. So sometimes there would be sequences of buttons to press in order to call up a feature that otherwise would be just enclosed in a push of a single button on the proprietary telephone. Where are those being installed? Quite often they're being installed in to power up Well, the main lobby. So if there's a office building for a certain company and there's controlled access, uh, instead of having a that big proprietary telephone, which is expensive, you might get an ATA adapter and connect that regular telephone hanging on the wall so somebody can pick up and call the reception to let them in. Also, ATA adapters are being used to, as I mentioned before, to connect the paging interface, and paging interface acts as pods. So you can dial up, because the ATA adapter will have an extension number programmed into it. And if you dial that extension that the ATA is, and if it has something else connected to it, such as paging interface, it is going to make that outlet ring just like the POTS line. And the paging interfaces are made in such a way that they're going to sense the ringing of the telephone line. They're going to, and they are programmed to pick up the phone and send you a confirmation tone in the form of a beep or something like that, or a series of beeps, which means that's your turn to for your action. So usually either talk if it's programmed that way, or you might be asked to, it might be programmed to press a button that is associated with the zone that you want to call or page or announce. Either it will be hallways, or just a production hall, or just a shipping and receiving, or just offices, just so not everybody has to hear all the pages that they don't need to hear. Right? Like the offices don't need to hear all the shipping and receiving what's going on there, because that would be annoying. Right? So that's why we use the ATA adapters. Right? Battery present, we already have discussed that in the last lecture. RJ stands for registered jack, and a trunk. A trunk is a multiple telephone lines physically bound in one cable. So instead of, let's say you're going to have 25 circuits, telephone circuits. Instead of running 25 cables, you might get a bigger cable that encloses 25 pairs, and that will be called a trunk line, right? That contains a lot of pairs, and this will be associated. Moreover, the trunking system would be more associated with the other side of your telephone wall, right? It will be used in within the telephone exchanges. So this trunk would be servicing, I was talking about many lines. This trunk would be servicing this neighborhood. The other trunk would be servicing the other neighborhood, so on and so on. So that's the trunking kind of a system. So that's what a trunk is. Right? No, it's not your car trunk. Okay. Let's keep going with the terminology here. Pulse dialing or Dtmf dialing. That has to do with the type of dialing. All right. The CO circuitry, for the most part, right now, these days, for the most part, the CO circuitry can sense both types of a dial. When you pick up the phone, sometimes you can hear the buttons producing different types of tones. So there will be a tone dialing. Now, originally, when the dial was introduced, there was no tone dialing. It would be pulse dialing. So you would have the rotary dialer. You would just go and bring whatever the number to the finger stop, and you release, and this thing would come back, and basically how long it takes for it to come back, it would produce certain types of pulses, which would be just interrupting and connecting the telephone line. And the circuitry in the CO, central office, would sense those pulses, and those pulses would represent a number. Now, later on, the technology moved forward, and the tone dialing was introduced. So you can dial things quicker. And the switching could be done more efficiently. So Dtmf, dual tone multi-frequency dialing. What's the dual thing? The dual means that every button that you press produces two tones at once, two frequencies at once, just to make sure that there's no mistake in this. So every single number is represented by two specific tones to that number. when the circuitry senses those two tones present at the same time, it is going to receive it as a number was pressed. If there were no two tones associated with that, you could pick up, and some noise, a car drives by or some TV playing or something like that could actually trigger the circuitry to think that some number was pressed. Right? So that's why the now when programming telephone systems, there are many levels of programming, but one of the levels is you're programming the incoming lines. You're programming how the box or the KSU or the PBX wants to behave when it comes to those lines, or how those lines are going to be programmed, the outside lines, and the other one will be programming the telephone extensions, the ringing, distribution, and all that stuff. But when it comes to programming the lines, one of the questions or one of the toggles or the options that you have to select, you're going to have the option of programming that line on the telephone system to be treated as pulse or a Dtmf dialing, right? So usually you want to program this thing as Dtmf instead of pulse. Why is pulse still being kept? I don't know, because probably, well, I don't know. I shouldn't say I don't know. I'm the teacher, I'm supposed to know everything, right? Well, why is it that some of the systems still have the option of using? Maybe it's because when the companies are selling the systems, they want those to be universal, and you'll never know who is going to buy it and where is this thing going to be installed. So in some maybe there's still some remote locations that don't have the system that would receive the tone dialing, which I doubt anymore, right? But I guess the system, the option still remains. So where would you have a problem with that when we send for service call? The service call would look like this. We can dial the numbers, but when there are the options to select, press 1 for the hours of operations, press 2 for whatever, press 2, 3 to whatever else. When we press the buttons, it just doesn't work, right? Well, because maybe some of the telephone lines that are being programmed in that telephone system, maybe they're being programmed as pulse dialing. So yes, the circuitry, the CO circuitry would recognize the number by the pulses, but when the automatic operator picks it up, and you have the voice announcement saying press 1 for this, press 2 for that, press 3 for the other thing, it is looking for those tones. And if it doesn't get those tones, if you have the line programmed as pulse, it's just going to get those those pulses like that, and it's not going to understand that. So that's when you have a service call like that, automatically you go into whatever the programming structure of that system is, and you're going to go into lines programming and make sure that they are programmed as tone dial type of lines. Right? Wrong mouse. Ground start and loop start. Remember when I was talking to you when the old telegraph and the old telephone connections were used? It would just be one wire, and the other one the other terminal would be connected through a ground reference. So that would be the old ways of doing it. Somehow still that option exists in the line programming. A loop start in order to initiate the connection is a pair. So instead of using ground, you're using a pair to complete the circuit. Right? Independent wires, independent from the ground, still grounded, but you're using loop. So whenever you're initiating a brand new telephone system, you're going to have the option of programming the lines. You are going to set the loop start, right? Other terminology that has to do with the telephone systems. Direct outward dialing, direct inward dialing. It has something to do with the features of the telephone systems. Okay, some of the telephones you can program. So once you press the intercom button on the phone, it is, or there could be buttons programmed in the so dial certain extension within the building, right? Or the other ones, direct outward programming, dialing, would be you pick up the handset and you have a pre-programmed button to call whatever the company is outside, or somebody else, some number that's outside, that you call all the time. So instead of dialing all that, so it's just like a redial button. But yeah, it's like a redial button, but it's not just one redial. You can program those to be certain type of numbers. Hotline, all right? Hotline. Well, hotline is just like direct or DID or DOD with a specific number dialed automatically. What is a hotline? A hotline is when you pick up the phone, pick up the handset, the telephone, that's all you have to do. Pick up the handset, and as soon as you pick up the handset, there's so much noise here today. I apologize for that. We're in the office environment, and sometimes things get heated up as far as communications. Right. So, anyways, hotline is you have a telephone set, and it's programmed. So as soon as you pick up the handset, it is going to dial number, specific number. Where is it being used? Well, sometimes you can see in some of the large department stores, you can see those telephones with no dialers on the wall, and it would be for a specific taxi company. So they are programmed as hotlines. Right? So as soon as you pick up, that phone dials that specific taxi company. Yeah? And sometimes you have few of those beside each other from different taxi companies. Yeah? 911 or 911 line and or set. Okay. Whenever we are installing telephone systems in large companies, we are going to have to install something that's called a 911 telephone set. Remember, if you use the telephone system requires power. When the power goes down, the phone system goes down. So you can't use any of those phones. What happens if you need to dial 911 for whatever emergency purpose? Well, you're not able to do that because the whole phone system is down. But remember when I said to you, when the POTS line is provided to the building, it is independent of the building's power. That telephone line still works because it gets the power from the CO, from the central office. So when you install that line and you bypass all the sophisticated telephone system circuitry and you run that line, you cross-connect that in the terminals, and you run that line to the outlet or the telephone jack, and you get the most basic telephone that doesn't require power, nothing. It just needs to be connected to the line. And we are required to do that. Okay, so 911 telephone. So when it comes to installing a telephone system in larger companies, you might ask the client, okay, where would you like your 911 phone? And they will know what you're talking about, right? Or they're going to tell you, we want 911 phone here, and because it's a big company, big building, another 911 phone would be somewhere there. So you need to run a POTS line to one of the 911 telephone sets location, and you need to run a separate POTS line into another telephone set that is somewhere else. It's because you can't use the same one, because if those are far apart and if somebody talks on one, the other one can't be used. Or if somebody hangs up in the wrong way, that the phone is not really hung up, then the other one would not be available for use. So you need to install the telephone sets on specific telephone POTS lines, all right? Single line versus proprietary telephone set. We just discussed that. Single line is just a regular single line set, the one that you just buy in a hardware store, and it works with POTS lines, and that's it. Proprietary telephone set works with the specific telephone system, telephone box that the telephone KSU, that is part of the system installation for that company. Okay, music on hold, we know what that is. If you call somebody and they put you on hold, you hear music. One thing I'm going to say about that is that for corporate, for the commercial use, music on hold can also be a service. So instead of, because quite often before, you would connect like a radio or some sort of a music player to it. So it would play something that's called elevator music. Okay, whatever. But why not if you have a company that wants to be not aggressive but proactive with the advertising and so on? Why not have something else being played? So there are companies usually in the States that offer something that's called a music on hold service. What that is, they will send you a box. They always send you a box, right? You mount that box, it's a smart device. On one end, it would have RJ45 jack Ethernet connection that would connect to the network. Right? And on the other side, you would have another line that would connect into the music on hold input of the telephone system. And once in a while, the company that's somewhere on the other side of the world, they would get from the management of your company, they would get the content, advertising content. Do you know that we have this month, we have tires on special and, changing tires from winter to summer, blah, 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 blah. And we have deals on that. And there would be this advertising exchange with music, blah, blah, blah. And it would be like a loop, like maybe 2 minutes long or 1 minute long. And then you would just be looped around. So once in a while, that company would create that content, that audio file. It would log into that box from outside. It would push that file onto it and set up, this is the loop that needs to be played. So when sometimes when the lines are busy, the automatic the automatic teller or the automatic receptionist automatic attendant can pick it up, and it would just say, please hold, and kaboom, you're switched onto that music on hold service, right? So it's a paid service. So music on hold can be, you can just connect a radio or something like that, or there's an option of connecting some other audio devices, such as that music on hold service. Dry contact and paging interface. These are the last two terms that I want to talk to you about. A dry contact is, let's say the telephone system has an audio output for paging that will be connected to the amplifier that would be connected to the bunch of speakers in the hallways that we just connected in lab number 2. Sometimes what happens, well, not sometimes, what happens is that if that amplifier is connected all the time to those speakers, and if nothing is connected to the input, and if the input is not grounded or shut down, then we would have a problem in terms of noises coming through the speakers, like a white noise or pink noise, a hiss or buzz or something. So that input has to be shut down when it's not used, and it only has to be opened when it's used. So what it's going to see is going to have an output for the audio output from the telephone system, and you're also going to have a dry contact relay. So they work together. When you do a page, the dry contact relay kicks in, turns on the input of the amplifier, and the specific PA system amplifiers, they have the inputs for the dry contact as well to activate that input. So that's basically what that is. It's dry contact. A dry contact is a relay contact that is operated by electromagnet, and it just has a dry contact. That means that that contact is not connected anywhere else. It's just like a physical switch that is not connected to anything else. You just connect those wires, and you operate that by electromagnet. The electromagnet makes the switch close, but it's not physically connected to the switch, right? So it's a dry contact. And paging interface, we already talked about what that is, or maybe we didn't. A paging interface is a Again, I'm going to call it a box that acts between the phone system and the amplifier. Sometimes you can connect the phone system straight to the amplifier if you don't have too many zones, it's one zone, which would be all call. Right? But sometimes you would have a bigger company that consists of office area, shipping and receiving, maybe some other production hall, or some other departments. And sometimes you want to page a specific area, so the pages that are being heard by you are only heard in that area, so the people who work in the offices, so they don't have to hear all the pagings that are going in the shipping and receiving and so on. So you could use something that's called a paging interface, right? So the paging interface would be a smart device that would pick up the signal that somebody wants to, the telephone system wants to page. So that's the paging interface, and usually connected through the ATA. So here's the telephone system, ATA. ATA translates the signal from the proprietary signal. So you're not plugging in the proprietary telephone. So it connects it, that transfers that into pods. And most of the third-party or whatever independent companies' paging interfaces are produced, so they have pods inputs, right? So you need the ATA adapter there. So telephone system, ATA adapter, paging interface, and maybe one amplifier or bunch of amplifiers, right? The paging system can work, the paging interface can work, so it has a bunch of outputs. And depending on which zone you want to page, by pressing a number on the keypad, it would activate certain amplifier that goes connected to speakers to whatever else, right? Or it could be a common amplifier, and the speakers would be connected in zones into the paging interface, and it would direct that amplifier to just that bunch of speakers. It's usually paging interfaces are to accommodate the zoning. Okay. As far as the direction of the pages. All right, 351. Let's see how far we can get with this one here. I talked a bunch. BICS connections. These would be the 25 pair cables, how things are being connected. Usually the things are connected in, like a distribution field, right? What would we have? Usually there would be those distribution terminals or wiring terminals would be placed somewhere in the communications room or LAN room or utility room or electrical room, rooms like that, right? So here's an example of one. What do we see here? Over here we see lines coming from maybe some primary demarcation point. This could be a secondary demarcation point. How can I tell? It's because I don't see the, I just see the wires. I don't see that interface from the city in terms of a box. And then the wires will be, maybe it will be 100 pair cable coming out of that, or two other 100 pair cables coming out of that, connected to the primary field. So sometimes there will be a main demarcation point that all the lines come to that room, and from there they could be distributed to the secondary locations. Maybe that secondary demarcation point serves the west end of the mall, right? The other demarcation point somewhere there would serve some other area of the mall or whatnot, right? So what do we have here? We have a bunch of telephone lines in the 25 pair cables, and they are terminated on the strips, and these are the BICS strips, and they're terminated here. And over on the other side, you have the field wiring that are traveling to some other locations. So maybe there would be two of those 25 pair cables going to a department store, small department store, two of them going there. Maybe some other ones are going to some other part of the mall, and yeah, so if it's a mall, or it could be a hospital, it could be something else, right? So you bring those telephone lines from the outside and being terminated on the termination strips here. The field wiring, which will be the destination wiring, wherever it goes, is terminated on the other side. And we have the cross-connect wiring going on. So you would tap into that pair from one side using cross-connect wire. And in this case here, it just goes on top and it's being terminated somewhere else. It looks complicated, but if all things are labeled and you know how it works, then it's just a lot of the same thing, right? So it's not as intimidating as it looks. All right, 25 pair connection. We have talked about that. Now, when we are going to do the lab, you're going to terminate one of those 25 pair cable into the termination strip. So I have already activated the video and included in the YouTube playlist. You have a long time to watch that. You can watch it in stages. You can speed me up as far as the playback speed goes, but you have to watch that video, right? It's an hour and a half long, but I just don't know how else to give you as much as you need. So when you leave our school and you face the world, you're going to actually have something to offer, right? It's going to make, it's going to, yes, you're going to have to spend some time watching these and ask questions and studying things like that. So you're comfortable and you feel as you have something to offer and being able to land some sort of a job that's not sweeping the dust of the telephone systems, or maybe you can connect doing what you want. All right. Enough of that motivational speech here. All right. So we're going to connect one of those, and the other side of that is something that's called the RJ21X. So one end of that cable is terminated on the big strip or whatever else termination strip, and the other cable, end of the cable is terminated on the something that's called Amphenol jack. It looks like this, RJ21X. Sometimes it's called Amphenol jack. These are pairs here, and they're being plugged in to the phone system like this, right? And just so the connections can be brought out, because the phone system would have a jack like this. You would plug in one of those, and here is the the pinout of how it looks like, male or female jack 25 pair. You can also use those Amphenol connectors, because those end-of-line Amphenol connectors, or RJ21 male or female, they come in male or female configuration. So if you want to extend a 25 pair cable, it's a good idea to use those two jacks. You terminate that on one gender on the other gender on the other cable and just plug them to each other, and you can extend a cable like this. The way we are using there's a tool to terminate those, and it's called a butterfly tool. Right? You can buy that right now on eBay, maybe for $25 if you're lucky. So it's it used to be expensive tool. Now it's not as expensive. All right. So and here's a video on how it just to kind of give you some idea of how those 25 pair cables are terminated using a butterfly tool. So butterfly tool is a tool to terminate 25 pair cables onto RJ21X, or something that's called Amphenol connector right here. So we always need tools to do things. We already talked about this slide here. Tip and ring, we talked about that. This is how the early telephone exchange looked like. Used to be human operated. Tip ring and sleeve. The loops, that the CO lines, they consist not of plus and minus or non-positive and negative. The correct terminology in telecommunications is to use tip and ring, and that's where it comes from, because those tip and ring jacks would be used by the telephone operators in the earlier days. Right? Peripheral devices, you know what? This is almost 4 o'clock, 1 minute to go. We're going to stop right here and we're going to pick up this next time we see each other. Because the VoIP telephone system is slightly shorter than this, because I have to give you some background, terminology. Terminology also applies to VoIP. So, call transfer. You're going to transfer a call whether you're using traditional phone system or you're going to use a VoIP telephone system, right? So you're going to transfer a call. So we're not going to repeat the terminology. So we're going to stop here, and I'm going to see you next time. I'm going to see you. All right. If there are no questions or whatnot, then I'm going to finish this class. We're good? We're good. Okay, I'll see you when I see you. Thank you, guys.